The war in Ukraine has plunged Russia into deep turmoil. What began as a swift operation has devolved into a protracted conflict. The conflict has exposed deep-seated problems within Russian society. The Kremlin now grapples with mounting internal dissent. Failures in Ukraine have emboldened critics of Putin's regime. Georgy Zakrevsky's call for a coup represents a significant escalation. His accusations resonate with a disillusioned segment of the population. The Kremlin can no longer ignore these voices of discontent. The world watches with bated breath, uncertain of Russia's future. Zakrevsky's call for a coup against Putin does not emerge in a vacuum. It follows closely on the heels of the Wagner mutiny in June 2023, a shocking event that shook the very foundations of the Kremlin. Yevgeny Prigozhin led his forces in a brazen march towards Moscow, exposing vulnerabilities in Russia's security. While Prigozhin ultimately backed down, his rebellion exposed deep fissures within the Russian power structure. The Wagner mutiny served as a stark warning of potential chaos and instability. Zakrevsky's call taps into the same vein of discontent that fueled Prigozhin's actions. Like Prigozhin, Zakrevsky represents a faction disillusioned by the handling of the war in Ukraine. The grievances that motivated the Wagner mutiny have not been addressed and may be spreading. The specter of Wagner looms large over Zakrevsky's pronouncements. The Kremlin is likely to respond swiftly to Zakrevsky's challenge. Can Putin afford to silence all opposition, or will it further inflame the situation? Georgy Zakrevsky, the man at the center of this unfolding drama, is no stranger to conflict. As the founder of the Paladin private military company, he has operated in the shadows of Russia's foreign policy for years, leading his men in various conflicts around the globe, including Syria. Unlike many within the Russian military establishment, Zakrevsky has not shied away from criticizing the Kremlin's handling of the war in Ukraine. His criticisms have grown increasingly pointed, targeting Putin himself. Zakrevsky's decision to call for a coup against Putin is a bold and dangerous move. He is acutely aware of the risks involved. The world will be watching closely to see how Zakrevsky's call for a coup unfolds. The future of Russia hangs in the balance. Georgy Zakrevsky cuts an imposing figure. A seasoned soldier with a stern visage, he embodies the hardened warrior. His background remains shrouded in mystery. Zakrevsky is a man forged in the crucible of conflict, emerging from Russia's military-industrial complex. His rise coincided with the emergence of private military companies. These organizations offered a way to project force without the same scrutiny. Zakrevsky first gained notoriety in the Middle East. His name is whispered in the bars and back alleys of conflict-scarred cities. Zakrevsky's reputation as a ruthless commander grew with each conflict. Section 2. Forged in conflict. The Paladin PMC, under Zakrevsky's leadership, quickly gained a reputation for its effectiveness and brutality. The group attracted a motley crew of former soldiers, mercenaries, and adventurers. Zakrevsky commanded their respect and loyalty. Paladin's operations spanned the globe, from Syria to Africa. They were involved in protecting assets, training militias, and covert operations. Zakrevsky remained a shadowy figure, rarely seen or heard. Rumors and whispers followed in Paladin's wake. Whispers of massacres and villages razed to the ground. Human rights organizations accused the group of war crimes. Zakrevsky dismissed these accusations as propaganda. Despite controversy, Paladin remained valuable to those who could afford their services. They operated in the shadows, their true allegiances known only to a select few. Zakrevsky, the architect of their success, remained an enigma. Section 3. A shadowy world. The world of private military companies is one of secrecy, intrigue, and violence. Allegiances shift like desert sands, fortunes made and lost on battles fought far from the eyes of the world. Men like Georgy Zakrevsky thrive, their skills honed in conflict, moral compasses blurred by warfare. Zakrevsky understood the rules. Loyalty was fluid, power with those who wield violence effectively. Discretion was key to survival. He built Paladin into a formidable force. The war in Ukraine was a turning point. The conflict forced him to confront his beliefs, questioning the foundations of his world. Section 1. A scathing indictment. In a grainy video, Georgy Zakrevsky broke the unspoken code of silence. He delivered a scathing indictment of Vladimir Putin and the war in Ukraine. Speaking with chilling calmness, his words were measured and deliberate. This was a direct attack on the heart of the Putin regime. "Our country is already in big trouble," Zakrevsky declared. He shattered the illusion of stability and strength Putin projected. Zakrevsky spoke of a present crisis threatening to consume Russia. His words carried the weight of experience and authority. Section 2. Drones over Russia. Zakrevsky outlined the dire situation facing Russia. Ukrainian drone strikes deep inside Russian territory are becoming frighteningly commonplace.
Drones are flying all over central Russia, right up to Moscow and St. Petersburg. They even attacked the Kremlin.
These attacks expose Russia's weakening defenses and the Putin regime's inability to protect its citizens. Enemy drones penetrating Russian airspace reveal the hollowness of Putin's military might. Section 3. The economy in ruins. Zakrevsky's critique extended beyond the battlefield, encompassing the wider societal impact of Putin's disastrous war. He spoke of a nation in decline, its economy crippled by sanctions, its people struggling to make ends meet.
The population is dying out, becoming impoverished, drinking itself to death. No one cares, he lamented.
These words cut deep, exposing the raw nerve of Russia's economic woes. The sanctions imposed by the West had taken a heavy toll, isolating Russia from the global financial system. Section 4, a call to action.
All this was done by the so-called president, the great Putin, he declared, his voice dripping with contempt. Our country deserves better, Zakrevsky proclaimed, his words echoing a sentiment shared by a growing segment of the Russian population.
Zakrevsky's call to action represented a dangerous escalation in the growing opposition to Putin's rule. It was a gamble, a desperate throw of the dice that could either ignite a popular uprising or lead to his swift and brutal demise. The world watched with bated breath, waiting to see how the Kremlin would respond to this unprecedented challenge to its authority. Would Putin's grip on power finally begin to slip, or would he crush this latest threat with the same ruthlessness he had displayed countless times before? Zakrevsky's call for a coup sent a shiver down the spines of many within the Kremlin. The ghost of Yevgeny Prigozhin, the Wagner leader who had dared to challenge Putin's authority, loomed large over Zakrevsky's pronouncements. The Wagner mutiny, though short-lived, had exposed a vulnerability within Putin's regime that few had anticipated. Prigozhin's audacious march on Moscow, though ultimately unsuccessful, had shattered the aura of invincibility that Putin had so carefully cultivated over decades. Zakrevsky's call for a coup tapped into the same wellspring of anger and frustration that had fueled Prigozhin's rebellion. The Kremlin, still reeling from the aftershocks of the Wagner mutiny, recognized the danger posed by Zakrevsky's call to arms. They understood that if even a small faction within the military heeded Zakrevsky's words, it could trigger a chain reaction, potentially spiraling into a full-blown civil conflict that could topple the regime. While the parallels between Zakrevsky and Prigozhin were undeniable, there were also crucial differences between the two men and the threats they posed to Putin's rule. Prigozhin, a flamboyant and unpredictable figure, had always operated on the fringes of the Russian establishment. Zakrevsky, on the other hand, represented a different kind of threat, one that potentially cut much deeper. As the leader of the Paladin PMC, he was a product of the very system that Putin had created, a system that had empowered shadowy military contractors and granted them a significant degree of autonomy. Zakrevsky's criticisms of the war in Ukraine, his accusations of incompetence and corruption within the military hierarchy, were likely shared by many within the ranks, even if they were unwilling to express them publicly. Moreover, Zakrevsky's message was carefully crafted to resonate with a wider audience, one that extended beyond the narrow confines of the military. He spoke of the economic hardship faced by ordinary Russians, the erosion of their living standards, the sense of despair and hopelessness that pervaded the country. The Kremlin faced a dilemma. Ignoring Zakrevsky's call for a coup carried the risk that his message would resonate with others, potentially emboldening them to take action. However, a heavy-handed response, such as arresting Zakrevsky or attempting to silence him, could backfire spectacularly, turning him into a martyr for the opposition and fueling further unrest. The Kremlin's propaganda machine, accustomed to controlling the narrative and shaping public opinion, struggled to counter Zakrevsky's message. His accusations of incompetence and corruption within the military rang true for many Russians who had witnessed firsthand the blunders and setbacks of the war in Ukraine. Zakrevsky's call for a coup, coming on the heels of the Wagner mutiny, exposed the fragility of Putin's grip on power. The war in Ukraine, intended to solidify Putin's legacy as a strongman and restore Russia to its former glory, had instead unleashed forces that threatened to unravel his regime from within. Zakrevsky's video message, a digital Molotov cocktail lobbed into the heart of the Russian information sphere, spread like wildfire. Within the ranks of the Russian military, Zakrevsky's words found a receptive audience. Soldiers, exhausted from months of grueling combat, demoralized by setbacks and heavy losses, shared the video amongst themselves, their thumbs scrolling with a mix of trepidation and grim satisfaction. The mood in the barracks, already grim, darkened further. Zakrevsky's accusations of corruption and incompetence resonated with their own experiences, their own observations of equipment shortages, logistical failures, and the callous disregard for human life that had become endemic within the ranks. The video became a focal point for their simmering anger and resentment, a shared sense of betrayal by the very system they had sworn to serve. Yet, alongside the anger, there was also fear. Whisperings of support for Zakrevsky were often accompanied by nervous glances over shoulders and a reluctance to speak too freely, even within the supposed anonymity of the barracks. Among the Russian public, the reaction to Zakrevsky's video was divided. Years of relentless propaganda created a climate of fear and suspicion. Many dismissed Zakrevsky as a traitor, a tool of foreign intelligence. Others saw him as a voice of reason, daring to speak truth to power. These were the Russians weary of the war and economic hardship. State-controlled media labeled Zakrevsky a criminal, a madman. Yet, Zakrevsky's message struck a nerve. In the chaotic battlefields of the 21st century, truth is often the first casualty. The war in Ukraine became a tangled web of competing narratives, propaganda, and disinformation. Zakrevsky's video message briefly illuminated the battlefield, casting long, unsettling shadows. The Kremlin portrayed Zakrevsky as a disgruntled soldier driven by personal ambition. His supporters hailed him as a hero, exposing lies and corruption. They circulated his video widely, hoping to rally international pressure against Putin. In the fog of war, it was impossible to say who was right or lying. The Kremlin's walls, once seemingly impenetrable, felt a new tremor. Zakrevsky's challenge, echoing through the ranks and across the digital landscape, struck at the heart of Putin's carefully cultivated image. For 2 decades, he had built his power on a foundation of strength, stability, and unwavering authority. To the world, he was the steely-eyed czar, the cunning strategist, the man who had dragged Russia back from the brink of chaos. Now, that carefully constructed facade was cracking, revealing the vulnerabilities beneath. Putin, a master of reading the currents of power, understood the stakes implicitly. Zakrevsky's call for a coup, though unlikely to succeed in the immediate term, represented a dangerous precedent, a crack in the edifice that, if left unchecked, could widen into a chasm. The very act of defiance, the audacity of questioning Putin's judgment and legitimacy, chipped away at the aura of invincibility that had long been his shield. The Kremlin's response to Zakrevsky's challenge was swift and predictable. State-controlled media went into overdrive, denouncing him as a traitor, a foreign agent, a madman driven by personal ambition. His video message was scrubbed from the internet, blocked by censors working overtime to contain the spread of dangerous disinformation. The Siloviki, Putin's loyal security forces, were mobilized to track down and silence anyone who dared to share or amplify Zakrevsky's message. Yet the harder the Kremlin tried to suppress Zakrevsky's message, the more it seemed to spread. The very act of censorship, the desperate scramble to control the narrative, only served to confirm the truth of his accusations in the minds of many Russians. The Kremlin's denials, once accepted without question, now rang hollow, their credibility eroded by the growing chasm between official pronouncements and the lived reality of the war. The question was no longer whether Putin's grip on power would loosen, but how far and how fast the unraveling would go. Zakrevsky's call for a coup exposed a truth the Kremlin had desperately tried to conceal. The emperor has no clothes. The image of Putin as the infallible leader has been irrevocably tarnished. The war in Ukraine has become a seeping wound, draining Russia of its strength. The Siloviki might silence Zakrevsky, but they cannot silence the doubts in the minds of ordinary Russians. The economic hardship and mounting casualties are realities no amount of propaganda can fully obscure. The myth of Putin's invincibility has been shattered. Zakrevsky's message has pierced the veil of fear and obedience that once shrouded Russian society. Predicting the future of Russia is a fool's errand. The country, a vast landmass straddling Europe and Asia, has always defied easy categorization. Yet, if there is one constant, it is the Russian people's capacity for resilience. It remains to be seen whether it will prove to be a turning point or merely a footnote. The answer lies in the hearts and minds of ordinary Russians. Will they continue to tolerate the suppression of their freedoms, or will they demand a different future? The future of the Russian bear hangs in the balance.